Hello everybody. Welcome to my first desktop recorded PowerPoint presentation. Because the technology is new for me, I might make some mistakes, but I hope you will enjoy it and learn something from it. Today I will be talking about my insights into educational developments and their application in a resource-based economy. I made this presentation for the independent group Moving Forward, an resource-based economy learning network. I presented it to them on June the 25th, 2017. Before going on to the subject of my presentation and the topics I will use to support it, let me give you a brief introduction to myself. I was born in the United States and raised there, and studied at the University of Massachusetts, the Boston campus, from 1981 to 1983. After that, I got my bachelor's degree in education in 2001 and my master's degree in education in 2016. Both of these degrees I received from the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. In terms of educational experience, I started out teaching English at a university in the People's Republic of China between 1983 and 1985. I taught privately in Nepal for a year for 1986, and for 10 years I taught at various businesses throughout the Netherlands before moving on to high schools where I've been giving English up until the present. In terms of politics, I was a Marxist activist in my college days, up until I lived in the People's Republic of China, where I saw why Marxism had not worked. In 2007, I first saw the Zeitgeist movement, and after that I became aware of the Venus Project. I've been a supporter and become more active in these movements in the present. The sources of this that I used for this presentation are educational literature, some relevant sites on the internet, RBE sites and their media, as well as my own experience and that of my colleagues. The thesis that I will present to you in this presentation is that education in a resource-based economy will need to build on new approaches to pedagogy, learn from approaches others than those used in the West, and provide principles and resources for self-education. I will support this thesis by first talking about formal education, looking at its history and development, what changes we have seen in modern education, what types of alternative education could be used to improve, and in the end look at how these various forms of education could be integrated in Jacques Fresco's proposals. Another section of the presentation will be focused on autodidactic or self-learning. I will look at the advantages and the disadvantages, the necessary skills that I think you need in order to be able to learn on your own, and look at a few examples of critical questions and how they can spur you on to learn more. Finally, I'll close with the sources that I've used for this presentation, as well as some suggestions from where you can look further. So, let's look at the beginnings of Western education. Of course, before the classical era, there had been education taking place. Ancient societies such as those in Sumeria, in Babylonia, in Egypt, all these different societies had forms of education. But since many consider the Greek and Roman civilizations as the birthplace of Western civilization, that is where I would like to start. Some points are important in how classical education was done. First of all, it was only reserved for elite, people from the elite, their sons and daughters. No slaves were educated, and very few women. Teachers were considered to be superior to the students, and the students were considered only being able to learn from their teachers. They used the inquiry method, which is a process of questioning in order to find answers, which was different than rote memorization that had been used in religious education. They based their theories and their inquiries on the works by the Greek scholars as well as ancient texts. Now, as I mentioned, this education differed than that being done in religious areas. Jewish, Islamic, and Christian school focused on religious texts, and any logic they taught was all aimed at supporting or discounting the things in these religious texts. Now, I don't have time to show the clip of the film that I have here listed, but I can highly recommend the film Agora for a look at not only how education took place in the classical age, but illustrating some of the challenges to education, to the finding of truth that faced them and also faces us now. Now, as good as I think the film Agora is, there was quite a bit of criticism about it. Many scholars said that the burning of the Library of Alexandria took place at various times. It was attributed to various leaders and always for a political purpose. The first report was that Julius Caesar sacked the library in 48 BC. Another Roman ruler, Aurelian, is said to have further decimated it in 270 AD. The scene that we see in Agora is actually the burning of the daughter temple, which housed a great many texts that had been in the library, and that was ordered to be burnt by the Christian bishop Pope Theophilus in 381 AD. Later, the Crusaders told people that the Muslims had actually destroyed this library when they sacked Alexandria in 692. This gave them a good reason to invade Muslim-based areas. The sacking of Alexandria was seen to be so important because many scholars believe that it set back development in the West by hundreds of years. But for me, in this presentation, I think it's important to see what measures people will go to suppress the truth. Book burning has taken place throughout history, and its sole purpose is to eliminate any ideas that the people in power think might challenge what they want people to believe. This certainly happened after the downfall of Alexandria. Yet it is not a phenomenon that only took place in antiquity. In the Middle Ages, books were burned. There's a book by Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose, which illustrates the thinking behind this, and even as recently as Nazi Germany. But what you may not know is that book burning is taking place even now. In 2010 to 2011, there were repeated burnings of the Koran in Florida. Climate change books were burnt at the University in San Jose. And ISIS, of course, also is known for its book burning. So this is a very important thing to look at how the truth gets suppressed. For our purposes, we need to look at how scholarship after the fall of Alexandria moved out of the West and into the Islamic East. In the West, we entered a period called the Dark Ages, and the only scholarship took place in monasteries. So, for about 1,000 years, education was only given to those in the religious orders, so monks and priests, etc., some healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, and of course the bureaucrats that had to take care of the administration for the ruling class. However, in 1650 we entered a period known as the Enlightenment. At this point, science changed completely from a theoretical to a more practically based look at reality. These ideals made their way into the education process. The printing press was developed, which meant that books were printed in great numbers instead of having to be handwritten. More women were included in the education process as well. The changes that took place in the education during the Romantic period are particularly significant because in this period emotion was thought to be more important than objective observation. Moreover, this was when nation states were formed, so it was essential that the education that people were getting supported the idea that their country was the best, their culture was the best, and the others were all terrible. Moreover, going to school became compulsory. Every child was expected to go. However, at the end of the 19th century, already some new ideas started entering into the educational perspective. In 1890, William James published The Principles of Psychology, and he said that the purpose of education was to organize the child's powers of conduct, in other words, to make a child tell a child how he had to behave, so as to fit into the social and physical environment, in other words, to do what society told him. At the end of the 20th century, however, this philosophy gradually became supplanted by the idea of androgyny. Now, if you compare the two systems, you can see the differences that took place between traditional education and more modern education. In pedagogy, the role of the learner is a completely dependent one. They are to sit down, shut up, and learn what the teacher has to say. Whereas in the androgyny model, the learner may start out as dependent, but moves increasingly towards self-directedness, finding out for himself what and where and how he wants to learn. The second point in pedagogy is that the experience a learner brings into the classroom from his life is of very little worth. Whereas androgyny says that the primary techniques for learning should be experience-based. What the learner knows from his or her experience is very important in how much they can learn. A third point in pedagogy is that learning should be the same for all children and should follow the same step-by-step process. They all have to learn the same subjects in the same way and receive the same tests. Androgyny is more related to programs which are centered on the applicability, that is, how useful the information is to the learner, and the readiness the learner has for learning it. Is he ready to move on to a new step, or do they still have to work on one? The fourth point in pedagogy is that learners see education as a way of gaining subject matter content, in other words, memorizing a lot of facts. They are assessed on their knowledge by answering questions on standard texts and receiving marks. In androgyny, learners see education differently. They see it as a way of gaining increased competency, of learning new skills in order to fulfill their potential in life. Now, as I mentioned, I've worked in a variety of educational situations, and I'd now like to talk about how many of these reforms from androgyny have already been integrated and what still needs to be done. In my experience, students, especially here in Holland, have much more ability to direct their own learning process. There's a lot of group work done at our school, and a lot of the learning is done as project-oriented tasks. Moreover, they have a varying degree of what they actually study. There are two schools in Holland, for instance, which have taken on the Swedish Kunskapsskolan theory to learning. In this theory, children decide completely what they are going to learn, the subjects, the content, they establish their own goals, and they work at their own speed to achieve these goals. Teachers are more coaches that help them in their own process. Furthermore, in most schools, subjects are taught in very much of a hands-on learning experience. The sciences involve tests, experiments in labs, field work, and I know from teaching languages that we look specifically much more at the use of the language in speaking, reading, writing, and listening instead of learning grammatical rules and the translation of words. On the other hand, and this is a big problem in secondary education, that students do not see the things that they are learning as being relative to their lives, to being something they actually have to use. So the only thing that they see it as applying to is how well they are able to fit into society and get a job. Furthermore, the education process also reinforces the idea that their full potential in life has to do with the status of job they get after school. So these are 2 points that will definitely have to be changed in a resource-based economy system of education. Another way of modernizing education that we are experiencing is the integration of technology. In my experience, there are computers at school to varying degrees. Sometimes they're limited to separate computer classrooms. Some schools have a few computers in every classroom. There are other schools that are laptop or iPad schools. My school is becoming a laptop school next year, which means that students have a laptop or rent a laptop for the entire time they're there to follow their courses with. And there are other schools which have a bring your own device policy. So you can bring your own iPad, laptop, smartphone, whatever you need in order to use the digital material. The digital study material really enhances the education process in a variety of ways. First of all, it makes it possible to learn at one's own pace and at one's own level. You can repeat lessons, review them at your own time and speed. The digital material is also challenging, and it allows a certain degree of interaction, which is much more interaction than the typical classroom with 30 students and one teacher. And at universities here in Holland, there is a special web port on the site of the school, such as where I studied, called an electronic learning environment. And there the professors can upload all the learning materials so that students can access it at home. So if they miss a class or want to review something, use something for their further work, it's always available to them. One final aspect that colleagues of mine are working on at their schools are the integration of virtual reality or augmented reality in their classrooms. You have two versions of this, a desktop version, which you can use via your computer or laptop, but also the virtual reality glasses, which totally immerses you in the situation. Now you can imagine how much more interesting and educational it is if students are learning about ancient Greek civilization and they're able to have a virtual reality experience of being in Athens or visiting the temples. So these are additions to education which I expect will increase even more in the resource-based economy. Now, one aspect of education that I think a lot of people overlook is what we can learn from the indigenous peoples of the world. And when I talk about indigenous, I talk about cultures which existed before or alongside of Western civilization. So I'm talking about North American Indians, Australian Aboriginals, the Bedouin tribes, people of Papua New Guinea. All these people have a different insight into the world, which we can also grow from. Why would we want to receive from Indigenous education? Well, as Jack mentions in his book, it's important that the children of the future have full availability to explore the development of all societies. We need to move away from a Western chauvinist point of view, a nationalist point of view that says our way of doing things is superior to other, and it will emphasize cooperation. So what we can see in indigenous populations is that their understanding of nature can be superior or different than ours. They live in a much more cooperative sort of way with each other, which is not based upon competition or the hoarding of resources. And they also understand, perhaps better than we do, the whole concept of sustainability, which will all contribute to a more holistic approach to life, which we hope to achieve with the resource-based economy. So I'd now like to take a look at some of the points that Jacques Fresco outlined in his proposals for education and see to what degree they have already or are being integrated in education and what still has to be done. In terms of the things that have been or are being integrated, we see that learners can explore their own interests more and more. They learn more in groups and they take part in the actual processes they are learning about. Rote learning and memorization is being reduced and they are being given more choice in what they study. The games and exercises that they get, at least at my school, emphasize creativity much more than just memorization. And one big topic in the Netherlands and at my school is how to get rid of grades, how we can help children learn that the process is just as important, if not more than important, than the finished product at any given moment. Things that Jacques suggested which have not been integrated and really need to be looked at is how we can shift the focus from national achievement to international, to see that everybody in every country contributes, to emphasize humane values and communication in our education, instead of the competitiveness that is so apparent. We have to teach children how to question things that they are learned, how to go on with questions and formulate these questions exactly. And this whole process of learning has to be emphasized instead of saying that there is only one answer, only one good way of looking at things. Jacques emphasized that children will need to learn that the facts are always changing and no one mechanistic answer or cause is responsible for anything. And finally, we all need to learn much more about various disciplines and not just about our own particular area of expertise. I'd now like to go on to the second part of this presentation, and that is autodidactic adult education. And the reason I'm doing this is because in all suggestions for education for resource-based economy that I have seen, the emphasis is on what children will learn. But my question is, who is going to teach them this? And more importantly, is that it is true that children look to adults for their examples. So we are going to have to be sure that we can give them that kind of educational example that they will be learning. So what kind of things, what qualities of an autodidact are positive that children can learn from? Well, people who educate themselves usually have the qualities of being insatiably curious, independent, knowing that knowledge is perpetually in development, They're creative in looking for solutions and looking for sources, finding answers. They're confident in the fact that they can learn things, and they see failure as not something to be upset about, but only a phase in the total learning process. Now, there are, of course, advantages and disadvantages to autodidactic learning. Some of the advantages are that learning things on your own usually supplies the 5 conditions which have been found for adults to learn well. For instance, adults learn well if they know why something is important to know or do. They learn better when they have the freedom to learn on their own. They also succeed more in learning when they are involved in the process, that it is experiential, and if the time is right for them to learn it. Finally, they learn best when the process of learning is positive and encouraging. Some of the disadvantages of purely autodidactic learning is that some people won't know where to find information, which can hold them up in their process. Also, they will not be getting feedback, which they would in a classroom setting, which can lead to going on completely wrong tracks for a long time before correcting themselves. It also requires more discipline and motivation. However, it is very rare that even autodidactic learners are completely isolated. Even famous examples like Bill Gates had the opportunity to talk with others, get feedback in order to further his own learning process. Now, in my opinion, in order to be a successful learner, you need to have 4 very important skills. First of all, you need to be able to use and understand the scientific method. You need to know what the scientific method is. What is science? How is philosophy related to science and its paradigms? How does that apply in education and discourse? Furthermore, you have to be able to use logic. How does one present an idea logically? How does logic help you further in your search for answers? How can you discuss things logically with others? And this is really something you don't learn on internet chat forums like Facebook. Critical thinking is again another essential aspect of self-education. What is based on evidence and what is an opinion? You have to differentiate between the two. What are the criteria you can use for judging if a source is trustworthy or not? And finally, you have to be aware of your own personal bias. How does my own cultural and personal upbringing influence my perceptions and my ability to change my beliefs? Am I able to get out of my comfort zone? Do I listen to others, or do I just think about how I can argue back while they talk? So these 4 skills really have to be worked on everybody supporting, I believe, the resource-based economy in order to meet better with people and explain the concepts and further to implement them in their own lives. And remember, for every question answered, another question arises. Now, to get you thinking critically on your own, I'm going to pose some questions that I'm working on. So, for instance, what does a resource-based economy mean? I think Einstein said, if you can't explain things simply, you don't understand them. How will it be implemented? Who came up with the concept? How did it develop? Another aspect is about robots and artificial intelligence. How can we be sure that the technology will not turn out to be a disaster? People are going to be asking about this, and you need to be able to answer this from really your own knowledge. Why are there no books about or mention of quantum science on the RBE sites? What is the difference between mechanical and quantum physics? Why is behaviorism the only psychological concept mentioned or in use? What other theories are there that explain human behavior? What are the differences and similarities between communism or Marxism and the ideas of a resource-based economy? Go into it. Do you know what communism is? Do you know what Marxism entails? Why did the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project split up? What are the differences of principles and activities? People are also going to want to know this, and you have to understand it in order to be able to answer them honestly and as an informed activist. Finally, I would like to conclude by reiterating my insight that a new system of education in a resource-based economy involves a variety of factors. We need to change from a pedagogic to an androgynous foundation. We need to integrate the knowledge from indigenous peoples. We need to look at and expand the use of technology. And we need to provide extensive resources for autodidactic learning. I want to repeat that these are my own personal viewpoints and do not reflect on any organization, and that I welcome well-grounded input, so things that are based on fact and not just opinion. I do not welcome comments by trolls. If you only want to argue or get people worked up, please go somewhere else. Well, that was the end of the presentation. I want to thank you all for listening, and I hope to be able to exchange ideas with you in the future. Bye-bye.